All right, Ansgar, you want to begin with your presentation and maybe be helpful in unpacking the broad question I raised earlier?
Well, maybe the thing I would like to do first, I guess, is to make sure that we are all on the same page in terms of how we see the situation now. I think a dangerous thing has happened in American education. It was perhaps predictable, but it's, I think, disturbing nonetheless. I think we have lost sight of what education is for, why we send our kids to school, why people enter the teaching profession, and in fact, what even a day looks like, what it should look like in a school. And I think we've become so obsessed with keeping track or of holding accountable or comparing and ranking that we have little time or appetite left for what we're keeping track of and why. And the reason for this is that we've made tests high stakes, and we've created a powerful industry, transformed our schools into test prep factories, and turned our children into over-anxious test takers. And we've made testing the basis of curriculum and instruction. Indeed, we've made it the very essence of schooling. Test scores now determine promotion, school admission, graduation, school closures, teacher tenure, principal contracts, and property values. They are the determiner of children's worth and teachers' professionalism. And because test results have been tied to every aspect of instruction, testing and curriculum have become interchangeable. Daily, today, principals report the arrival of packets of commercial material extolling the linking of curriculum to test prep. We've reduced the learning process to granularized modules developed outside of classrooms where a multiple choice format rewards short answers to superficial questions, thus leaving little time for exploration and creativity. We have dramatically reduced time devoted to experiencing, to serious discussion, to doing science, to reading stories, to making sense of something, to becoming an expert, to learning about our classmates, to appreciating art, music, and activities that make us human. In short, we've become so obsessed with tests and test scores that instead of curriculum and instruction driving assessment, assessment now drives what we teach and how we teach it. Maybe you're skeptical. If so, consider the testing calendars of 2 mid-size urban school districts where an AFT conducted study found that students spend up to the equivalent of a full month per year being tutored for tests and taking the tests, 14 different assessments in one of the district grades, 47 separate administrations in a year in the other district. And this finding is by no means rare. In fact, in some areas of the country, testing and test prep accounts for 25% of the school year. And along with the testing, of course, goes our equally obsessive attachment to data. Data about everything. Observations of even the smallest child's behavior become a number. School officials, the system, the press, the parents, even the kids themselves refer to the numbers, turning anxiety to shame. And this despite the frequently reported debacles regarding the unreliability of the scores. In New York, as a result of the release of Harvard's Dan Koritz's study of 3 to 8 testing in the state, schools that the central office had designated as reaching 81% proficiency in reading and math, overnight tumbled to 18%. Children who'd been classified as a 4 suddenly found they were at best a low 3, even a high 2. Unfortunately, in education, data, particularly data from test scores, often drive critical decisions: the school closures, promotion or retention, school admissions, and down the road, job security for teachers. But as New York Times columnist David Brooks pointed out in an often quoted article, What Data Can't Do, as we acquire more data, we have the ability to find many, many more statistically significant correlations. Most of these correlations are spurious and deceive us when we're trying to understand a situation. Falsity grows exponentially the more data we collect. The haystack gets bigger, but the needle we're looking for is still buried inside. And even more significantly, data obscures values. Data is never raw. It is always structured according to somebody else's predispositions and values. Given all this, it's fair to ask what we have to show for all the money, time, and attention spent on testing, test preparation, and data collected from the tests. Well, we have ballooning budgets, spent on test prep materials, test company contracts, the tests themselves, Scantron machines, and per-session payments to those who volunteer to grade the written test portions. Cheating scandals abound alongside increases in class size, shrinking allocations for classroom activities, fewer class trips, dramatic increases in student suspensions, and ever-increasing teacher attrition rates. And we have a growing presence of data-driven instruction based on flawed tests and curriculum directives that are age inappropriate and educationally bankrupt. What we don't see is evidence that the achievement gap is substantially reduced across racial and economic groups, or that our children are becoming better educated, that we have produced greater numbers of well-prepared graduates or more well-informed and alert citizens. Increasingly, we have students who are reaching 18 years of age with fewer than 10 high school credits and persistent dropout rates. And even 70% of those who do graduate, who in New York State must take and pass 5 Regents exams with a score of 65 or above, are not, at least according to the officials at New York City's university, ready for regular college courses, and therefore must take non-credit-bearing remedial classes. Can we expect all this to change with the introduction of the Common Core? It seems highly unlikely. Too many states have made the error of going from standards straight to assessment with no curriculum, or professional development, which would help teachers prepare. There is no time or inclination to review the effect or assumptions behind the Common Core. So once again, the new tests have become the curriculum itself. Scores for the Common Core tests show an even steeper decline than for previous state assessments. Anticipating a disaster with the arrival of last spring's Common Core-driven test scores, letters went home to parents in New York from both the state commissioner and the chancellor of New York City, warning parents to expect the worst. More kids who were proficient last year will be labeled failing this year. Obviously, something's wrong here. In the words of the GPS goddess, we need to recalculate. We need to return curriculum and instruction to their rightful place, where they drive assessment, not the other way around. We need to do with public schools what those who carry the banner for more testing do with their own children. They send them to schools like Sidwell Friends, where curriculum and instruction are valued, where children and teachers problem solve and engage in active learning, and where testing is mostly teacher-driven. Teachers in schools belonging to the New York Performance Standards Consortium are trying to do that, to construct and refine an assessment system that respects teachers as professionals, initiates collaborative projects with other groups of teachers in schools, challenges the competitive structures set up by NCLB and Race to the Top, and views assessment as an extension of the learning process, not a punitive bludgeon. The consortium has designed a multi-layered system. It is developed by teachers, grows out of the curriculum, and includes not only math and English, but also social studies and science, art, so on, provides for student choices and opportunities for student voice and engagement. It requires students to read and write extensively across subject disciplines, including the arts, and defend their work orally before external evaluators. The 39 public high schools in the New York Performance Standards Consortium have embraced these practices. All consortium students are required to complete 4 consortium-wide tasks: literary essay, applied mathematical concepts, an original science experiment, and social studies research paper. Additional tasks are required by individual schools in such areas as foreign language, creative art, internships, art criticism, and so on. Expectations are spelled out in a set of common consortium rubrics, which are used to evaluate student work. Schools meet annually to participate in moderation studies to ensure the reliability of the system, and are reviewed by the Performance Assessment Review Board, a group of non-consortium educators who evaluate the functioning of the system within individual schools. The consortium system is founded on the belief that teachers are professionals and as such should be the ones responsible for developing assessment tasks for their students. Unlike standardized approaches, the consortium approach to assessment acknowledges that not all students are alike. that one size does not fit all, that learning is complex and assessment should be too, and that teachers have the deepest knowledge of their students and curriculum and should be empowered with the responsibility for designing appropriate, fair, and effective assessments. So while all students are required to complete tasks that meet standardized rubrics, what they write their papers about, what topics they choose to research, what books they analyze for graduation level work is not. And in addition to the written requirements, with papers running sometimes 15 to 20 pages, students must defend their work orally to external assessors. From the very beginning, the consortium has insisted that test scores were not sufficient to show whether a school had been successful. We even insisted that graduation rates were not sufficient. Since we'd witnessed how particular departments of education policies, such as strategies for students to recover credits, could increase graduation rates whether or not students had actually learned anything. Our criterion has always been the long view, students' success post-graduation, whether they were sufficiently prepared to persist in their post-secondary work. Would they have the academic, behavioral, and emotional skills to succeed in a college environment once they were on their own? The evidence shows that they are, and that consortium graduates, many times the first to attend college, and most of the consortium families, have the skills and preparation and self-confidence needed to persist. The results of the consortium's work are documented in something you have in your folders. There's a data report in there. Here are a few highlights. Although consortium students begin school with a lower academic achievement, higher rates of poverty, and a larger percentage of minority students in the overall New York City public school population, they graduate and attend colleges at higher percentages. Consortium schools graduate twice as many special ed students than the larger school system, and 40% more English language learners. Consortium graduates persist into their second year of college at both 4-year and 2-year institutions at rates 93.3 and 83.9 respectively that exceed New York State and national rates. A 3-year study reported in Phi Delta Kappa followed 660 consortium graduates into their third semester of college. The study looked where they went to college and found that 77% attended 4-year colleges, 19% 2-year colleges, and 4% vocational or technical programs. Of those attending the 4-year colleges, 83% were enrolled in colleges described by Barron's as competitive to highly competitive. The consortium does not regard its system of performance assessment as simply an add-on, another form of requirements dropped into schools. Rather, the system is embedded in the school's entire approach to curriculum and instruction and is an organic outgrowth of a particular kind of teaching and learning. Consortium schools differ from non-consortium schools in several significant ways, having more to do with how they think about their mission and their students' attitudes towards learning. The system is rooted in inquiry, teaching, and learning. Inquiry teaching views student interest, experience, and viewpoint as a crucial framework for assimilating academic content. It assumes that the accumulation of information is relatively useless unless learners can articulate and elaborate their own perspectives on the material. Students must be allowed to define and interpret material on their own terms and on the basis of their own experiences. The schools share a belief that students do their best when they're invested and engaged, when they take ownership of material that teachers also care about, in-depth investigations in which they become experts rather than merely observers. This shift is not lost on students. Recently, a group of consortium students preparing to interview New York City's mayoral candidates about their educational platforms discussed how their schools differed from non-consortium schools. Here are critical characteristics they singled out about their consortium schools. The curriculum goes past the superficial, these are quotes, so that you really understand a topic. Assignments are different. They require time and thought. The work is more challenging and students have more responsibility for their work. Student voice and opinion are valued. We can disagree with one another. I learn a lot from other students. Teachers care more about what they're teaching. We don't learn stuff just for tests. They measure progress long-term, learning over time. There's very little teacher lecturing, much more discussion. Teachers guide, not tell. There's a lot more writing and revision. The writing is less formulaic. It's a real preparation for college. There was just recently a forum with a group of students, and we have a very small little clip of some of the students, and I think it's probably easier to get a feel for what is important to the students and how they explain it. So we have a very short little video.
This prize that was awarded by the AFT was a juried selection based upon what the Performance Consortium has done. You prove that you can lead with teaching and lead with learning, and that an accountability system around that is a real accountability system if what the purpose of education is to prepare our kids for the future.
I have both worked in a school where there was high-stakes testing, and now being at this school, it's basically another universe. I get to go in depth with subjects that interest the students and that interest me. I get to be super creative, writing all my own curriculum. And I constantly ask them the question, why, and why, and why, and they leave my class knowing a whole lot, as opposed to when I was teaching to the regions, and they'd know very little about many, many things.
The previous high school that I was at, Afield Randolph, was basically a school that put a lot on regions and whatnot, and I didn't necessarily like that. In my old school, I used to get 70s and 80s, and most of my teachers would be like, we know that you're an A student, and we know that you can do this material. But to me, it was like, this material, it's uninteresting, it's boring, it's not something that I want to put effort into. So when I came to Urban Academy, I found classes that I really loved. I took a class on Japanese pop and modern culture. He is a Japanese artist named Yoshi Tomonara. He did a lot of art on a subject called Kimo Kawaii.
We actually learn things that are relevant to society. A few weeks ago in my history class, we had a debate about stop and frisk. And the debate actually extended after school hours because we were just so heated about what we believed in.
I now have the time to actually be committed to every piece of work I do. So I have an essay due. That means I'll have every day to do some research on it. And our essays are usually 10 to 20 pages. One of the things that I actually like about Vanguard is that we apply not only just what we use in class, but we also bring in outside knowledge. We bring in resources or interviews with other people, and we bring that all together to really create something wonderful.
It's so much more freeing as a teacher and so much more fun. I actually left my first school just because it was joyless, I think, to be teaching to the test all the time and to be judging my worth as a teacher by what I could get my kids to memorize. And then came back into the school system a few years later, realizing that there are schools like this one that does allow students to go more in depth and does allow teachers to actually teach and pursue their passion.
We were learning together as a class. We've done presentation after presentation. We've done similar discussions.
As somebody that is not a native language speaker, this approach is much better because you get to practice your speaking throughout the presentation. You get to speak. You get to practice also how you could really express your ideas in English.
Urban trains you to be more of a thinker than a button pusher, and that's what standardized testing is. It's pushing a button, and when you graduate from that, you don't have the skills to live outside in the real world.
I'm very interested in graphic design, where many of my peers that I'm in classes with at BMCC, they're just learning these things in Adobe programs, like After Effects, that seems so basic to me. And not because I learned these things at Urban, but because I learned at Urban that you need to be involved with things that you have passion for. You know what I'm saying? And to really have the, know how to harness that and use it to propel yourself in the direction that you want to move into.
Tells us is that finding alternatives to high-stakes testing is not simply about changing the type of test or reducing the amount of test prep. It's about changing how we think about teachers and teaching, about kids and about learning. It's about priorities, about putting art, music, drama on an equal footing with other disciplines, and about creative environments where students and teachers can interact with one another in ways that encourage young people to use their minds well. As one of the teachers in the film noted, the consortium model creates a positive work environment for teachers. Teachers are given the time and support to collaborate as professionals. They have a voice in their school policies and practices and a sense of ownership. And as a result, a full 85% of the consortium's teachers remain in their schools, while New York City's overall retention rate is only 42%. This longevity and stability, in turn, positively affects students and the long-range goals and missions out of school. No longer stymied by too many days set aside for standardized testing and test prep, our schools have the time and opportunity to develop more engaging curriculum for students, which then leads to better attendance, lower suspension rates and dropout rates, and stronger school communities and higher levels of students gaining skills. As a result of the practices developed in the early consortium schools and in those most recently added, the level of academic work has risen among all the member schools. Here are a few examples of the kind of assessment tasks that students have pursued. This is one in math. How a fatigue-reducing drug, Adderall, used while preparing for the SAT tests impacted on students' performance at tryouts for the basketball team. Using calculus to determine the most eco-friendly redesign for Tropicana's orange juice container. Seeing eye to eye, using trigonometry and functions to determine if the eyes of two students moving on two facing Ferris wheels will ever meet. Must have been a boy and a girl. Social studies. Should India's untouchables receive affirmative action? Emmett Till and Trayvon Martin, how far have we come? Revisiting childhood, how children's books treat those issues of equality and social values. Literary analysis, how society influences who you are and who you become, an analysis of Kindred by Octavia Butler and Passing by Nella Larson. Equality in times of war, examining Euripides' Medea. And in science, just a few, the effect of rock and roll, jazz, or science listening when you're studying algebra. Ecology, the effect of antifreeze on duckweed population growth. It was explained by the student that this is an important question because people put antifreeze in their car and it leaks out or it isn't properly disposed of and gets into the storm drains and flows into bodies of water. In chemistry, a paper on do energy drinks affect people's alertness. Clearly, the consortium has crafted a solution to assessment challenge and developed a system that is built on respect for both student interest and teachers' interest, a system that is without high-stakes testing but gets effective long-term results. And while this approach may not suit everyone, shouldn't we at least allow such efforts to flourish as we try to improve opportunities to learn for all children? Thank you.
Thank you, Ann.